So I walk into her room, and she's in the shower. There's her walker sitting out there, and she has the call bell draped over the walker, in case she falls and she has to get the call bell. So Mom, should not have been giving herself a shower at that point in time. This is about, a year and a half ago. And I used to stop and see her on my way to work and have some coffee with her. So I was bebopping in, ready to have my coffee with her. And there she is in the shower. And I have to tell you, I was so angry with her because she knows she's not supposed to do that. And yet, there she is doing it by herself. It was one of those moments where I really stopped and thought about, here's this woman who is who she is, and she's very independent, and she wanted a shower, and she wasn't going to wait for the caregivers, and I could tell her to wait. I could lecture her about falling again because, we had been to the ER for her falling probably 3 times that month. And she could say to me, yep, she understood that and she wouldn't do it again. And yet in that moment, she was going to do it again. And some of that had to do with her stubbornness. Some of it had to do with, although she didn't have dementia, she had some cognitive decline. Her lung problem made it so that she couldn't get enough oxygen. And so for me, I decided that I was going to get caregivers to be there every morning at 8 o'clock because she was going to do this again. And I wasn't going to stop it. And she wasn't going to accept that she couldn't do it. And I think, for everybody, really kind of understanding that as people age and you're caregiving for them, it's so hard because you have the way that you interact with those people. And sometimes my mom and I could be oil and water. If that had happened 20 years earlier, I would have laid into her. Her and I would have gotten into a huge argument. And I probably would have been so irritated at her, I wouldn't want to talk to her. But I didn't have the ability to do that because she needed me. Here she is declining and really dependent upon me. And part of me honored her fight because but for that fight, she would have never made it as long as she did.
Right.
Right?
It was that stubbornness that kept her going.
But part of me also honored the fact that I could give her a bunch of facts and she could agree with me in the moment. But when she was making that decision, she still saw herself as capable of being able to do it. And my facts were never going to stop that self-image of herself. It was deeper than she just wasn't listening to me. She really thought she could do it. And she wouldn't have done it if she didn't thought she could do it.
Right.
And so, I really had to change how I felt about it and lean into that. And I think that I just don't think a lot is talked about how the caregiver, so much of this is about my mom and what was going on with her, but how do I deal with this? And some of what's out there, I don't think does a really good job. I remember, they talk about role reversals, or, you become the parent and they become the kid. It's not that. It's not. Because my mom didn't become a kid. She had her own thoughts. She still saw herself as a capable adult. And, children grow. Children are dependent on us too. But children grow and they become more and more independent. Mom was becoming more and more dependent. And, if anything, she was a child that was not growing, but that was receding, So I just, for me, that's wrong because there's no way that I could just have using my parental authority on her. One, she wouldn't have had it. But for anybody, I think you have to sit back and understand, like, that's not how they see themselves. So I, as a caregiver, have to figure out how to deal with that. And I have to say, like, I think this is one of the hardest parts of all of this is knowing that as a caregiver, I don't have to be perfect.
Well, and I think, we even talked a lot about the caregiver has to come to terms with the diagnosis, and, nothing can happen until the caregiver comes to terms with it. But what we don't talk about is that the person has to come to terms with it. And I think that's what we're talking about here today. I don't know that Nan ever really did, or it definitely was not as early as it needed to be that she came to terms with the fact that she couldn't do things anymore. Like, I remember, and I think for a lot of people, like, the driver's license is a really big deal.
Yes.
And so, I think we've shared, but I'll just briefly share. So my Nan had bones that were protruding into her spine that would have paralyzed her had they not been put into a cage. And so she had that surgery, and the surgeon said she could never drive again because she can't turn her neck like you have to when you drive. In order to, like, turn to face you, she'd have to turn her whole body. So she was able to live a relatively normal life. She just couldn't drive because she wouldn't be able to, like, turn to look to merge or something like that.
It's actually Pennsylvania law that she couldn't drive. Yeah.
Yes. So, but, like, the surgeon knew that. But we knew that, and so we actually had to take her keys, which is a really hard thing to do because, it's a very rural part of Pennsylvania. You can't really get anywhere without a car, and she was now dependent on people driving her around. And just as a quick aside, her primary care physician was not at all helpful at this moment because refused to take her driver's license. And so even
in fact, thought we were being mean to her.
Yes.
When in fact the surgeon was the one that told us that this has to happen, although he didn't do anything either.
Right.
So we as a family had to deal with this issue.
And I think, that makes it more complicated. The professionals that are sometimes supposed to be helping you aren't. But then you kind of get into this weird, like, sometimes I felt like I slipped into a weird thing when we would talk to her about it because we took her keys and we had to keep her car because it was the only vehicle she could get in and out of. So, like, if we take her to doctor's appointments and different things like that, like, we kept her car, but we kept it at our house. And she
couldn't get in my Jeep.
Yeah.
Or my husband's truck.
But then she'd ask about it, and I would just be like, oh, like, Dad put it in the garage because it's going to rain. Or, oh, Dad's, like, doing something with it. Or Uncle Buddy's getting the oil changed. And sometimes those things were true, but sometimes, like, you were lying to her. But it was like, did I lie to her because I knew that, like, she just let that go, right? So, like, I knew if I told her it was going to snow and Dad put the car in the garage. Now, that had to be the truth. It had better be snowing because she definitely watched the weather and she would know if I was lying or not. But, she was okay with that because she was like, oh, Dad, like, my dad is looking after her. But if I told her, like, there was something, but if I had told her that, like, she couldn't drive, like, then her and I are just going to get into an argument about, like, yes, she can. And then she's just upset and she's going to dig in further. So do you upset her? Do you play pretend? Like, it's a weird dichotomy of things to sort through as the caregiver.
It's so hard not to get into that argument because, you're wanting, and whether the person has some form of dementia or not, you're wanting her to understand why that you're not being mean, that why this has to happen. And, for sometimes, it's so hard not to kind of engage and, say to her, well, Mom, remember the surgeon said you couldn't do that. Or, you can't merge because you can't move your body. Like, give her facts that support the reason that she can't drive. Because if you do that, if you decide to go down that route, what can happen is she may say something back that triggers me as a caregiver. Like, well, you never would let me do what I wanted, or just like a jab at me in some ways. And then how do I not have that escalate? And to be honest with you, I wasn't perfect at this. there was times that I would escalate it because it was just like so irritating, and, because she can't drive, like, why are we having this conversation again? Like, why can't she see it? And what I learned through that is that it wasn't really her being stubborn. It wasn't her trying to be difficult. She really saw herself as an able person, and she saw herself as like 20 years ago. And whether that's because that's what she wanted, whether that's because she couldn't remember some of our conversations, those facts, all I know is that she reverted back and she saw herself as somebody that was really capable and able to do things. And I know in some ways, I think she needed to feel that way to keep struggling and moving forward. And, that helped her with her drive. But, again, being that caregiver, it's so, so hard. And I just don't think we talk about this enough because, I didn't always make the right decisions. Sometimes I wish I had had more grace. And sometimes I think I did an okay job.
Well, and sometimes we did the best job that we could.
Yeah.
At that moment. But I think, looking back, like we talk about the good and the bad of Nan, but, so often family relationships are different. So like going into this, I definitely had a very different relationship with Nan than you did.
Very true. She loved the grandchildren. You guys were perfect.
But so that helped when she was being difficult. If I escalated something with her, it would diffuse faster because honestly, she didn't expect me to get upset with her. And that really upset her. And so that would like bring things back down. But you two could go at each other.
Oh yeah, we had for years. I mean, and we loved each other, and adored each other and respected each other. But yeah, if we had something to say, we were saying it, and could fight about things. And she wasn't always a fun fighter. Like she'd say what she thought.
No, she was down and dirty.
Yeah, and could trigger me. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think what's important is that doesn't just go away because she has restrictive lung disease.
No.
It's just an extra layer to the caregiving. Everything doesn't just get perfect because you get a diagnosis. Because honestly, that's fake.
Yeah. I mean, so what ended up having to happen was I needed to change my attitude and embrace those idiosyncrasies and find the value in them. Because otherwise it was just too difficult. And, all of us, every one of us, everybody that's listening here, we come to this caregiving with jobs and other stressors in our lives and raising kids. And it's not like on any given day, all I was doing was caregiving for her. And even if, just to be honest, even if I was just caregiving for her, that's really hard. Like, yes. So, but my day, I could have been at work all day. Who knows? I could have good things, bad things. And, coming home and I'm tired and I'm maybe not at my best self. And so when she starts into something like this, I would hope that I would have the grace to, diffuse it in some ways or, hear her out and meet her where she was at. And some days I did a really good job of that. And some days I didn't. And I think in my grief of her having passed, I have to let go of the times that I wasn't perfect, and that's really, really hard. And it's funny, you talk about, you kids, the grandkids. I also think for everybody listening, you got to use who you have. You're right. Sometimes I couldn't tell her something.
Steph could tell her anything.
Oh my goodness. Steph, that was on our another episode about her wedding. Steph could tell her you're right. She would go over there. And with mom didn't want to use her walker. That was the big issue with Steph. She didn't think she needed to use her walker. I mean, we had been to the ER 3 times that month, but she didn't think she needed to use her walker. And, Steph was like, hey, woman, and just went over there and kind of told mom what she needed to do. And mom was like, okay. And I was like, what? What just happened here? But she really listened to staff. And so I had to learn to tag in the people that I could. And, my brother Buddy could tell her things that, and she would listen to him. She would listen to you. But
it's funny. I could never yell at her because she would just cry. Like, she would be so upset that I was disappointed in her. So, like, very different than, like, you and her. Like, you and her could go at it, cool down a week later, and you're, fine. Mm-hmm. Staff could yell at her, and in the moment it's fine. But if I had yelled at her about the walker, she would have been so upset that
she would have been hurt.
Yes.
Yeah, she would have been hurt because you didn't see her the way she saw herself.
Yep.
That's why all of this is really, really hard. There's like a fine line between, getting through the day of caregiving and doing what you need for the person. And let's be honest, sometimes why this is so frustrating is because it makes it harder to care for them. Mm-hmm. Like, why are you making my job harder? Like, if you would just do this, so one of the things that used to just drive me up the wall, we'd be going out to go someplace and she'd be worried about everybody else. Meanwhile, she can't walk herself and not right. fall, but she's like, oh, get that, worry about this, hold the door for this person. Or she'd try to hold the door. It's like,
oh my God, when she would try to hold the door for somebody, I'm like, you're gonna fall over, just keep it moving. Or she could never go anywhere without her purse. And then you end up carrying it everywhere because she can't, and it falls off the walker. By the way, you're not paying for anything, I am. So I don't know why we need your purse. I have my driver's license and my credit card, but it was important to her.
Yes. And so, I think that's the flip that just had to happen at some point in time. I was like, Mom, you don't need your purse. But then we'd have to have a 10-minute conversation, and then we get in the car and she'd be like, I don't have my purse. Again, you don't need it. To me really being understanding that if we were going to leave, we needed the purse. And so I might as well go find out where it is. Maybe I could get her a purse that was easier for me to carry since I was the one carrying it.
I stopped carrying mine and just put my stuff in her purse.
Yep, absolutely. And remember her walker, it had a little lid on it?
Oh my God. Everything that woman has ever owned would be in that. And then you have to collapse it because you have to put it in the back of her car. And then the fucking stuff is all over the back of her car. And you're just what is happening right now? What are we doing? And then she's sitting in the front because you have to put her in the car before you take the walker to the back. Remember when she used to drop off her walker to the back of the car and then she would continue on, and you're just well, no, you get in the car and then I'll take care of the walker. And the stuff is flying everywhere. And she's like, what's happening? And it's nothing.
Nothing. Yeah, nothing. Yeah, it was in her, but that was so her worrying about other people and trying to help out. But again, I at some point in time, I just kind of sat back and realized that she didn't see herself the way we saw her, and that I had to kind of embrace that, and if she, couldn't drive and had to tell me how to drive, I had to hear that.
Oh yeah, I did not do it well. No. This is bad, but one time I took her to the doctor, and I was running late. And it was kind of one of those things where you did have to learn to allow 30 minutes before you picked her up to get her purse and do all this stuff. Mm-hmm. Or when we hired caregivers, we would give them a list of things to kind of get ready. But I was running late. And it was kind of last minute that I decided to take her. And so I'm in the car, and I'm semi-stopped at a stop sign. I can see the hospital, and this dog runs out and hits the car, and I felt so bad. But I saw the dog run away. I saw the owner, she was late to the doctor. We just kind of kept going. So then we're late for something else after the doctor's appointment, and I'm going pretty fast, and she's maybe we slow down and we don't hit another dog. And I was I didn't hit that dog. I was first of all, that dog hit me. I didn't hit the dog. The dog was fine. I don't see a dog right now. It was just she was going to get her jab in. Yep. She didn't make it when the dog hit the car. I do want everybody to know that the dog was fine. I did circle back afterwards. And everybody was fine. The dog did hit me. But yeah, she was going to get her jab in. She didn't always have to be right then. And I could be upset about the fact that the whole day was just not going well. or you just kind of take it in stride. But I think what I want people listening to understand is that sometimes that's harder than it makes it sound. So you and I were both really fortunate with our jobs that, you own the firm that we both work at. And so that allowed us a lot of flexibility in our jobs. Like I could last minute change almost my entire schedule and take her to the doctor. Or if some sort of emergency came up, like you could, I mean, we all have responsibilities, like you had clients and different things like that, but
yeah, I could move it. It doesn't take it off my plate, but yeah, you're absolutely right though. I had flexibility, which was helpful.
Or if she needed a shower and I was home, I just started my day at 9:30 and gave her a shower. And then I worked until later. It's really hard to do what we're saying when you're working 9 to 5 and you're worried about losing your job because you've had to take off and you've had to shift your schedule and you've had to do all of this stuff because emergencies do pop up. It's really hard then to kind of like keep your cool in the moment when they're making your job more difficult, when everything else is kind of crashing in. And you get to these moments where I think for me, like I get to these moments and I don't feel like I'm doing anything well. Like, and you're just so overwhelmed by everything that's happening. And I think, this is happening to me quite a bit, through the grief process afterwards. You just feel like you're not doing any of it well. Like I'm not going out and seeing my friends. I'm not doing well at work. And, there's some truth to that, but not a lot. I'm still moving things forward. You're still getting things done. Like life goes on. And very rarely would I say, are you not doing anything well? There's probably a couple of things that are going well, but it feels like that. And when that happens, you have to lean into that. And you have to acknowledge that maybe things need to be dropped. But when you're caregiving, that can't get dropped.
Right.
Because that person still needs you. And so other things have to go, or, we've talked about caregiver support or, doing things like logistically that make things easier. We talked about that in a different episode. This is more than that though. This is letting go of the emotions that are weighing you down when you're sitting in your car and you're crying because you don't think that you've done a single thing right in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where like what I want our listeners to hear is like, it's okay not to be perfect, like the jabs that you're talking about, they're going to come, and we want to do our best job to lean into where our loved one's at, but know that like sometimes we're going to take the bait and not to beat ourselves up over that, rather think about what changes need to be happening. What help do you need? Are there siblings that you have, grandchildren that you can kind of tag in to give yourself a little bit of a break, or who might be able to get that person to do whatever it is that they're not wanting to do for you. And, we talk a lot about my mom, and, she had some different things, restrictive lung disease. She also, had the issues with the bone spurs. But, take this on to somebody who has dementia, and it becomes like this whole other level because even my mom with just, some mild cognitive issues with not getting enough oxygen, she couldn't process the stuff, the facts. She kind of leaned back into her old self and who she was. But, somebody with dementia is not going to remember. And so all of what we're talking about kind of gets accentuated because do you bring them back to reality? That's not helpful. It's funny. When I was a social worker in the 1990s, that's what we were taught to do with people. We were taught to do reality or orientation therapy. Like it seems, it wasn't that long ago. It seems so dumb at this point in time. But that's what we were taught to do. And I think that's hard. And I think, what does that do to the caregiver? And so I really want, everybody who's listening to this to really decide to lean into those idiosyncrasies, those things that frustrate you, that are maybe now accentuated by whatever the disease process is. But also give yourself a break if you're not able to lean into them. If, something happens that triggers you or sparks you to reorient your loved one, that, either they're making your job more difficult, or what they want to happen, that they still want to drive or they don't want to use their walker, that can't happen, and, enlist others to help you. But I think I spent a lot of this caregiver journey trying to do the best I could in the time periods I can. And, we talked about kind of in another episode, we talked about like adjusting to that new normal that you have to. But this episode, what I want people to get is that it's deeper than that. Like that's, I can adjust, I can figure things out. But at the end of the day, I was beating myself up because I wanted to do for her what she wanted. But when she was making it so much more difficult, or wasn't understanding, just how difficult or her situation was, that I, at times I took the bait and I'd get into an argument with her, and that's really not helpful to her or to me. Same point in time, I think her strength and her really helped me advocate for her. She ended up having really the process that she wanted. She was able to stay at the personal care home, although, many people thought she should go to a nursing home. And even her primary care physician really supported me there by saying, there's nothing a nursing home can do for this woman. She's still going to take her shower.
With or without somebody in there with her. Like when she wants to shower, she's going to shower.
Yeah, she's still going to do that. She's still going to. And so we were able to, use short-term therapy sessions that were, 10 to 14 days, and an inpatient rehab short-term to re-strengthen her, to get her back there. We were able to add caregivers to the staff that were really tailored to what my mom needed. She needed a shower at 8 a.m., not at 11, at 8. And so I had somebody there at 8. So if she wanted to shower, somebody was going to help her do that. And I did the best job I could around my job. Going to the doctors was hard. But I would, stop and see her on my way to work a lot. And I miss those times. I miss those breakfasts. She would tell me all about the news and the weather. Now I go into the world without knowing what the weather's going to be. I would go at night. And I think, the wedding planning, that was the hardest thing, not being able to go over at night and chit chat with her about what we had done and where we were at. And so I just really feel for everybody that's out there caregiving. And I hope that you don't beat yourself up as much as I did about it, really trying to lean in. And there are times that I can kind of take a step back and say, you know what? I really did make the switch. I really did lean into who she was, and really got myself to a place that I actually enjoyed that, and gave her the time to open the door and assisted her in what she wanted to do. I wish I'd gotten there earlier, but I did get there. And to be honest with you, it was that time in the shower. It was that beginning story that I tell you about, because I thought, dear God, this woman's going to do this. It doesn't matter what I say to her. I better get on this train because she's calling the shots, and I better assist her in what she needs. And, just know that's what she's going to have. And, I think it's a hard transition, I think, because you have got to push down all of the baggage of that relationship and put it in a little box and put it away. Because if you go back to any of those patterns, the jab is going to cause you to jab back.
And I think, that's good advice no matter where your relationship is. So if you, sometimes, this isn't an opportunity to change a 40, 50-year-long relationship, right? You're not going to make up for the last 40 years in these last 2 just because there's a diagnosis and everybody's happy now, right? But it's also, if you are sitting here and you're listening and you're like, no, we have a good relationship. Like, there's not baggage. Every relationship has baggage and has idiosyncrasies and has its ups and downs. And honestly, like, if you've never had conflict before with the person, so that's where Nan and I were. We didn't really have conflict. Like, I was the oldest of 5 grandchildren. And
you were perfect.
And I was. And
as long as you accept that.
There was nothing wrong with that. But, that came with difficult for me because I couldn't correct what she was doing, because it was just as bad, if not worse, as if you had done it, just different. So if you were correcting her behavior, she's jabbing back. If I'm doing it, she's upset because now I see her as less than perfect.
Yes.
And so, there's 2 sides of the coin here, and they're both complicated. And, we navigated it by just sending stuff in.
True.
And she could say anything to Nan, and it was fine. And I did, once she accepted the walker, then I could say things like, woman, like, I don't have time to take you to the emergency room today, right? Like, you have to continue to use your walker. And
she thought that was funny when you said that.
She did. Yeah. Now, if you had said that.
She would have said, you never have time for me.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. No, I knew I couldn't say that.
But I could, because she knew that, like, if she did need to go to the emergency room, I was taking her.
Right.
But, and so my role was very different in that, like, if she was upset or angry or throwing a shoe at the caregiver, for example, like, my job was to de-escalate her. And that's a hard job too, because she's in a bad mood, and we're not used to that in our dynamic. And so I think, all of this, but I wasn't going to inject the ability for us to manage conflict resolution in the midst of doing everything else. So we all have a role to play. And we were lucky to have, like, a bigger family where we could kind of, like, assign out these roles. So people that are listening, I would urge you to think about, like, who in your life, like, can you hire caregivers? And they can be the bad guy. Because a lot of times they are. And, they're trained to do that a little bit. And, they can do some of this stuff. We were able to, with the showers, we just hired caregivers. And that's not to say, I think a lot of people would have gotten mad at the staff at the village, and they would have said, oh, well, like, they should do it. They shouldn't. Like, there were 70 residents, there was a schedule. They were doing different things. They're trying to provide for everybody. The fact that Nan wanted a shower at 8 and couldn't wait to her allotted slot at 11, that really isn't their issue. And they did so many wonderful things for her that, you can't get mad at the facilities. You really, they're just like we are, they're doing the best that they can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, for those of you who are listening who say, you wouldn't have the ability financially to hire caregivers, I'd urge you to, contact a local elder care attorney, because there could be benefits. There's some, through the local Office of Aging, the Caregiver Support Program. If your loved one or their spouse is a veteran, there could be benefits through the Veterans Administration. There is also, in many states, waiver programs that help with in-home care, and provide. So I think that's something that it's definitely worth your time looking into what benefits are there that could assist with that. There's, in some states, there's, the LIFE program, the PACE program. There's just a lot out there, and it is definitely worth your time to look at what financial resources. Now, we're in a situation in this country where they're ever changing, and there's certainly been some cuts under the most recent legislation federally, and that will trickle down to different states, differently. But I would encourage you, every day at my office, we're talking to people where we're able to let them know that there's some help that they didn't know that existed, and help them maybe take advantage of that to make that caregiver journey easier. Some of it can depend on diagnosis. There's the guide model for dementia. So don't just stop with, we can't afford that. Please look into professionals. Sometimes maybe calling your local Office of Aging. There's a county Office of Aging in every county. Getting on our planningandprotecting.com website and finding a local attorney in your area that could be helpful. or even Googling, but you definitely want to get somebody who is a certified elder law attorney, and who will hopefully, understand what all type of funding sources there are and how that can align with your family, because, some of this is getting you more help and, understanding that the journey's long, because it's easier for you as a caregiver to not take the bait or jab if you're not so tired, if you're not so overwhelmed and exhausted. So getting help, whether that's through family or, calling that sibling that hasn't come home and, saying like, I need you not just to visit, I need you to actually caregive. I need this from you. I think it is helpful in what we're talking about, because I know that for me, one of the ways that I was able to do this is that there were a lot of grandkids. I had my brother, my husband. And when, the grandkids would come home, like Cortney would come home from Boston, I would tap myself out a little bit. And because I needed a little bit of a break, and I knew she was in good hands with those grandkids, I did decide to buy care. I personally paid for that care. My mom didn't have the money to be able to do that. I personally did that. And some of that was for her, honoring her, who had done so much for me in my life. Of if she wants a shower at 8 a.m. and that's really important to her, we're going to do that. But some of it also was for me, because then I didn't have to worry about it every morning that I went to work. I still stopped by and had my coffee, and sometimes, chit-chatted with her a little bit, but I didn't have to do that every single day. And so my visits with her could be helpful. She may have complained about the caregiver sometimes. Another issue that she just couldn't give up is, doing the laundry. That was before the shower, but she would do her own laundry. And she was at a facility where they would do her laundry, but they wouldn't do it the way she wanted.
And like every time she fell, she was leaning into the dryer.
Exactly. Yeah. So there I'm at the ER, and it's hard. It's hard in those moments. Because, I can remember being in the ER and her looking at me and saying, I know she's sorry for doing it. But she didn't have to say that. But at that moment, I didn't want her to be sorry. I just wanted her to be okay. I got more phone calls going over there and, seeing her bleeding. I just didn't want that. And so, but what I couldn't do was get her to stop being her. If anything, she became more her. If anything, if she had looked in the mirror, she didn't see the person I saw. And I think that's the biggest revelation. If you're going to maneuver this, you have to know that what you see is not what they see. And I think that's not just true of my mom. I think that's true of so many people. And it's whether it's because it's not what they want to see, or whether it's because they really just don't see that. I would say with Mom, she really saw herself in a different way. And you know what? 6 months after she's passed, I'm glad that she saw herself that way. I'm glad that she held on to that image of herself, that she was capable, that she could do it. It's so funny. Another story I remember, Court, and this was closer to the end. She was actually on hospice. And I would sleep with her. I would sleep not with her. I would sleep on a couch beside her bed. Because, again, she was at the point where she wouldn't always remember to use the call bell, or she didn't think she needed it. She didn't want to disturb them. I would say to her, Mom, why didn't you use the call bell after she fell? Well, I didn't want to disrupt them. That's what they're paid to do. That's why they're here. But okay. So anyways, because of that, again, rather than having that argument with her, I started spending the night with her. And I would lay on the couch right beside her hospital bed. And I have to say, there was some really great moments. Luckily, her and I liked the same TV. And so we could, watch TV. We both like sports. We both like, a variety of different things. And so it wasn't bad. And I live very close to where she was at. And so I would just get up in the morning and then, go to work. But anyways, I was laying there one night. And this is closer to the end. Like, She is not able to get out of the bed herself. There's no way she's getting out of the bed herself at this point in time. And I'm laying there and it's like 4 a.m. and I look over and I see her like little body like rocking like kind of back and forth, and probably not as nice as I should have, but I said, "Mom, what are you doing?" And she said, "Well, I'm up. I might as well get going and doing something." And that in that moment was so my mom. She's up. She might as well do something. She might as well. I think she even said, "I might as well make myself useful and do something." And I could have said,
"And do what? It's 4 a.m."
I know. I could have said, "Mom, go back to sleep," like whatever. But you know what? I remember I got up that morning and I said, "Okay, Mom, let's go," And I got her up and took her to the bathroom and brushed her teeth. I think I even may have given her a shower at 4 a.m. And she sat out and, got on her chair and started watching the news. By the time it took a while to do anything with her. So by the time we did that, the news was on and she was off on her day. And she was happy about it. And by the time I left at like 6 a.m. to go get my shower to go to work, she was asleep again, sleeping on her chair. But, again, in that situation, I just thought, gosh, that is just her through and through. Might as well get up and get doing something. She wasn't ever a person who, laid around or, she was always putzing around doing something. And
you gotta make hay when the sun is shining.
Yes. Yeah, I was raised with that. You gotta make hay when the sun's shining, and the sun wasn't shining at 4 a.m. just so you know. I just remember thinking, my goodness, that woman can barely move, but she was, and honestly, I let her do it for a while because I thought maybe she'll just go back to sleep.
Maybe she'll rock herself back to sleep.
But she didn't. She just kept rocking, and I got up. But it's funny. I think if I wasn't in the mind space of leaning into where she was at, and I didn't have the help I needed to not be overwhelmed and exhausted, I wouldn't have been able to handle that situation with the same amount of grace.
Well, because let's be honest, she went back to bed at 6 a.m., but you went to work.
Yeah, I
did. For a full day.
I did.
Right? So, I mean, so you honored her the way that she needed to, but there was a cost, like for you, right? Because you're going to get your shower, so you would have slept for another 2 hours. You lost 2 hours of sleep. And so that's where I think, like, if you have to work a traditional, 9 to 5 job and you have to be on and you have to do what you need to do, like, your day doesn't get any easier. But that moment for her made it worth it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why you can't do it every day, right? Mm-hmm. You can't get up at 4 a.m. every time. And so, like, how do you navigate what they need with what you're able to do?
And really come at it from this idea that they're growing more and more dependent on you every day. And you really have to honor that. You really have to change your role, and not one as your child, but this person who's given so much to you, that you have to honor them and know that they need you more. So you got to figure it out, and you can't figure it out the way that you always did. And that doesn't mean that a relationship, 20 years ago wasn't okay, because we were equal at that point in time. And so we could jab at each other. In fact, to be honestly, I wouldn't have it any other day. I don't even know how we would have interacted any other way. That was us, right? But that couldn't be us at the end, because It wasn't fair to her, because she could jab, but she couldn't stay in the fight. And so I had to just stop and lean into what it was she needed and she wanted, and provide that in the best way possible. And forgive myself if I wasn't perfect, because sometimes I took the bait and I felt bad about that.
And you really, like, we all have to release ourselves for not being perfect in so many aspects of our life. And so I want to thank the listeners for listening in on this episode of the Hey Woman podcast, and really let them know that they're not alone, that we'll continue to unpack things in the grief and caregiving journey, and hopefully provide a perspective that's helpful as you're going through these moments. And remember to honor the person where they're at and forgive yourself for not being perfect. And if you haven't already, to go ahead and rate us, like us, follow us on TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, and go to the planningandprotecting.com sites. We're dropping a whole bunch of new guides. We talked in another episode about our funeral planning guide. There'll be toolkits that are coming out and different things to really help you on this journey. And we're really excited to be able to be offering these kinds of things to our listeners.